Hello and welcome to another Daily Muppet. In today's video, I want to mostly just pack it in with transfer news. I could do a preview of Aston Villa, but maybe tomorrow morning or something like that. There's a lot of transfer news to discuss, a lot of different subjects. There's a lot of things in the media right now, and I'd like to explain some of it, clarify some of it, and let you know what kind of answers that I have been receiving in asking about the different things that are being brought up from right back, Enzo Fernandez, strikers, all of it. So let's first get into it. In terms of January, what I gather is that the club are mostly focused at this point in time still on outs. They're there's and I'll discuss this when it comes to the right back situation, what kind of the dilemma and disagreement is within the club, because I realize that there are still certain people involved in the running of the club, as we know, that potentially make it complicated and tricky to figure out what's actually going on and who's actually doing what. So to start, the club do hope to raise up some funds in January, and some of the players that they're looking at moving are obviously Wan-Bissaka. I've asked contacts connected to this deal, and there's actually a decent chance that they're lining up a loan to buy agreement for January into summer. The buy would not be a high amount. The loan would obviously cover his wages for the rest of the year, and he'd have to take somewhat of a pay cut to go to Palace after that, which might do so to get a new contract. But apparently those talks are active and happening, and they may even be fairly close to an agreement for a loan to buy for Wan-Bissaka to Crystal Palace. They wanted him in summer. They still are interested in bringing him back. So there's a lot actually happening on that, and it may be a little bit closer than we think. There's players like Axel Tuanzebe, who they will shift if possible. Facundo Pellistri, as we saw, wants to leave in January permanently. As I mentioned in a few videos, that I do not believe that it was just a temporary move. He wants to get his career on track. So they will look to potentially raise funds there and then talk about where Ronaldo can go, if anywhere. And that's obviously the biggest hang-up. Moving forward into summer, at this point in time, it's expected that they will look to shift one of the four center backs for better balance in a replacement. However, Skriniar is expected to sign a new contract, so in terms of free agents, the pool getting a little more limited. They were looking at Skriniar briefly, but he is expected to sign a new contract at Inter now. Other players that they're expected to shift in summer, as far as I know, still is potentially Donny van de Beek. I've been told that Fred is expected to be his option triggered and offered maybe a 3-year deal at a lower wage to finish out his time at United, and that's kind of the type of what they want to do there. So they're looking to raise funds in the midfield as well over summer. They're looking to do that. They prefer to get a new contract for someone like Fred on a lower amount. But all of that is still holding until any new contracts are still holding until after the World Cup. A lot of work is expected to be done during the World Cup, and one of the reasons you're seeing a lot of news now is those preliminary contacts are being made to players' agents. So much like in March when suddenly you get a flurry of 10 different players, well, they're just making those early contacts because even lining up deals in January for the summer is something they like to do to be a bit more proactive. We'll see. I'll believe that when I see it in terms of those January deals, but for summer, but it would be nice. So they're trying to raise some things here, but it's still going to be very dependent on that out in January. Now, when it comes to the right back, you've seen that there's a good article that's come out from James Ducker that says that they're likely to buy a right back if a right back is sold. However, you've seen from Samuel Lucker saying that Laird has a recall option and they're unlikely to spend anything in January regardless. So like I said, I got the information that it was quite possible that Wan-Bissaka deal is very closer than we think to Palace. I don't know about very close. I have to find out before I can say that, but closer than we think, and their discussions over a framework of a deal that have taken place. And the disconnect here is, because I've talked to a few people who have had good information from the football side that say they don't expect Laird to come back and they want a new right back. And then I've spoken to people who've said there's no way they're spending any money in January. So you bear in mind this is the conflict within the club when it comes to the football side and who approves the money. So you know what I'm talking about, as I've talked about this almost ad nauseum at this point in time. But that's the conflict and why you might see conflicting reports. Are there football people who are scouting and looking for right backs and things like that? Absolutely. Is there interest in players like Frimpong? Absolutely. At the same time, is there a potential where there's other people in a different part of the club who are saying there's not going to be any money available for January. We don't expect the board to approve funds for a buy in January. You're going to have to recall Laird if you sell Wan-Bissaka. Yes, also true. So you see, I'm just saying both of these things are unfortunately true. And that is the challenge a little bit, is that both of these aspects are true. Both of these things are true. And which direction it goes, we've yet to see. That could depend on whether they can shift some other players and get some other sales in addition to Wan-Bissaka to raise funds. But then it's going to be a question of, are they told, look, if you spend some money here in January, well, on a right back instead of Laird, you're going to have to sell him in summer, and which would make sense to me, and the budget's going to be lower. And that makes sense to me too, unfortunately. So we're going to have to see what direction that goes. But they are certainly exploring a lot of different avenues for where to go with all of this. And that's kind of the difficulty as it stands. So then, there's more reports that have come out about Enzo Fernandez. One that says they want to buy him in January. Well, I think that part is absolutely crap. But there's been a lot of reports about players in Portugal. And as I mentioned before, there's in the last video, there's 3 positions of major priority in terms of funds: striker, goalkeeper, center mid, and then a right back is a necessity from a squad perspective. They know that, and then a center back as well in an ideal world that they can replace and get that. In terms of the list for the center mids they would want most, Enzo would be very high up that list. When we talk about a better Fred, Enzo Fernandez is the exact player. I mean, he is. He's a presser. He's a worker. He moves. He runs around. He gets highly involved in the game. But he has more quality to put on in going forward and linking things up. Be a perfect midfielder to fit into the team that we have. But I think he's the perfect fit. I think he'd be quite expensive. But they've been looking in Portugal. You see reports about excuse me, reports about all sorts of different players. Obviously, Diogo Costa, Gonzalo Ramos, all these different players they're looking at in Portugal. It's definitely a market that they're looking at because a lot of clubs there need to sell. So, Enzo Fernandez is one I would definitely add to the list in terms of the midfielders. If they choose to pursue a midfielder this summer, he would be up there and much more attainable than Jude Bellingham, who's just an impossible target. It's so expensive. And it's tricky. It's a difficult matter because, as I said, there's not a ton of budget available. I don't think there's enough to get a big striker, a big midfielder, and a big goalkeeper without some major movements. So, it seems to me, based on the planning, that they're thinking it's probably 2024 when they're going to get another midfielder like that in there because a striker and a goalkeeper are such a necessity. And that's what I would say about that. But in January, it's extremely unlikely for something like that to happen. Moving on to Garnacho, I just wanted to talk about this. There's been some confusion out there at times about his contract. As far as I know, I've heard a couple of things that his contract, they have the ability to extend it for 2 more years beyond the summer all the way to 2025, and I'm quite certain that's true, that in his contract are clauses they can extend until 2025. So it's not a vital necessity gets a new deal right away. That's why there's not a panic or a rush. But they would like to get him on a different terms and a longer contract to lock him down for 5 years. But he is contracted, should they activate certain clauses and options, to 2025. So it's not something where they would have to necessarily get him now, a new contract now where he's going to leave or something like that. So just to recap all that before I go to the last point, in January, expecting outs of Wan-Bissaka, they're looking at Axel Tuanzebe, Pellistri, and of course the Ronaldo situation. Right back, there's a split in the club in terms of will they have the funds to buy a replacement, or will Laird be the one that has to come back in? And at the top, they seem to have a preference for let's wait till summer to buy anyone. The three positions where they want to spend the most money on are goalkeeper, striker, and center mid. And goalkeeper could be covered with those outs we've discussed. Striker, we've seen a lot of the names. There's a good report they're interested in Victor Osimhen. They are. They have been. They made contact about him last year. Gonzalo Ramos, Šeško, and now the other name escapes me. There was one other legitimate name that I'm forgetting that we've talked about very recently. Vlahovic. Those are four good names to keep an eye on in terms of striker situation, and where I think the majority or bulk of the funds would go as Ronaldo leaves next summer. So that's why I don't see this. Depending on the purchase, they get a good deal, 50, 60 million for someone like Vlahovic or Šeško, and then they can buy Enzo for 50, 60 million, sell Dean Henderson, renegotiate De Gea's contract, and bring in someone like Diogo Costa. That's an exceptional summer that is potentially affordable if they make Champions League and a few things go right, including selling someone like Donny van de Beek, getting rid of, obviously, Ronaldo, and obviously the Dean Henderson, De Gea situation, maybe reducing Fred's contract, etc. So a lot up in the air there, but they're really looking at those priority positions, and Enzo Fernandez is certainly one that would be of interest. Now, moving on to the club sale, you've seen the news that Liverpool are obviously up for sale, and that there's a story that Jim Ratcliffe's group is no longer interested in buying a top Premier League club, that he was very interested in summer with Manchester United, but his interest has now waned essentially and gone away. And I'm not super surprised by this. It's obviously a disappointing report, but I'm not very surprised by it. As I said, there's really no guarantee. There was never any guarantees of what was going to happen on this. He's not the only potential buyer. It's not the only potential route for the club to be sold. They did discuss things. They did have talks with the Glazers. They did go over things. But the reason I've been sort of, since the initial reports where there was some interest and all that, and it was very exciting, since then I very much have tried to damper expectations a little bit, because I've said I think it's going to be a long process for a club sale. And the other issue is that Joel and Avram, while they had explored and have been exploring the different avenues, they're not convinced 100% to sell the club. They're not. They would still prefer to see what can they do this year, whether that's to inflate the value of the club, or if it's a possibility they're still trying to find investment to do the things they need to do. I don't think they are. And so the point is, since I know they've been forced to look at it, they're not forced to sell yet. But I do think in the long term, it's more likely they are forced into a situation where they have to let the club go because they cannot get the investment required. And you look at a situation like Liverpool, they may now be waiting and saying, let's see what Liverpool sell for. What's the valuation there? What does Liverpool get bought for if it gets sold fully? How long does it take? And that's after they've invested in stadium and training ground and things like that. And it may give them a marker for the value. It may give them a marker for investment. I find it to be a good thing because it's going to put them in a situation of we could cash in. There's still a lot of interest in football clubs. So it's a tricky situation. It's a long thing, all of this. It's going to take a long time for anything to happen. And I have not expected things to move quickly. I have a strong feeling from talking to some people that there were people at Ineos who there were some discussions and a valuation they were interested in buying the club at. The Glazers have at this point said no, hence the lack of interest in saying it's not worth the value. If you read between the lines on that comment, if seeing no more value in buying a top Premier League club, what does that mean? It means the price given in some sort of discussion was so high that Jim Ratcliffe said, nah, this isn't worth it. You see, he wouldn't say that for no reason. His interest wouldn't go away for just no reason. He didn't say they're not for sale. He says he doesn't see the value, and henceforth, basically, the money. It's too much money. And so, I firmly believe from the information that I've heard that they've had some discussions, and even recently, and it's unfortunately, this is the outcome of it, that the Glazers are naming a high price. They think they can increase the evaluation further at this point in time. And they still not convinced to sell, so it's not like a for sale price. It's, you can take it off our hands for this amount, but we're still looking for investment and things like that to see if we can get it going before we consider a full sale. So that's the situation, as it were. Let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comments below. What do you think about Enzo Fernandez? Does he fit right? Is that the better Fred that we need in the long term? With this light getting on my face the whole time, it's very obnoxious. Should they buy a right back in January or save the funds and recall Laird and see what he can do? Would you accept selling players like Pellistri, Tuanzebe, Wan-Bissaka, obviously, maybe more, Van de Beek and Summer, if it allows United to make the purchases that they need to make through the summer? So give me your thoughts in the comments below. Make sure to like, subscribe, turn notifications on. I'll see you in the next video.